Let's kick off with our first discussion then at 9:08. Before jumping into Burnham's musical choices, let's start with his cabinet selections. How does he go about making all these all-important appointments? Kitty, let's start with you. There are sort of these different tribes, aren't there? There's the ones who've supported him in Manchester. There are those who've been more loyal to Keir Starmer. There are some new fresh faces. There are some that could have been recruited who haven't been in the cabinet for many years or so. How do you think Andy Burnham is going to manage all of those different factions?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? And we saw this in Makerfield when everybody and their dog went up there and signed their name on the big piece of paper they had in the social club to say, look, I've been here staking a claim. And they've all been queuing up outside his office in the last couple of weeks, or the MPs being quite transactional, actually, saying, I want this job or that job, or I want a bypass in my constituency, so much so that people are taking the mickey out of them in Parliament, saying it looks like a dole queue, and even handing out biscuits to people waiting outside his office because the queue's so long.
Is that right, Kitty? They're actually having to sustain the people in the queue?
Yeah,
wow.
They're giving them biscuits.
Oh my word.
Yeah, I was told by someone whose office is nearby who is amused by this sort of long queue of people. But I think what's kind of more sort of fundamental is trying to keep the party together. And you're right, there are different factions. There are the kind of long-term Burnhamites, the Louise Haigs, the Lucy Powells, the Lisa Nandys of this world. And then there are the kind of 2024 lot, or the MPs who elected in 24, some of whom are talented and were loyal to Keir Starmer, but don't see why they shouldn't carry on in their roles. And then the kind of the right of the party, and I think it would be a mistake for Andy Burnham to be kind of too factional when he appoints his cabinet and his ministers, because then you're kind of storing up problems for the future. You're storing up party discipline problems. Although he's been doing quite a lot of outreach to try and learn all their names and introduce them, and I think the conversations have been going well. So I don't think there's any problems yet, but the problems start when, people don't get jobs.
Well, exactly. And actually, he's learnt a lesson, hasn't he, from Keir Starmer, who didn't meet with many of his MPs for months. Yeah. And then, therefore, when they were all happy to sort of say, I've done 2 fingers to your welfare reforms, it caused major problems. Guto, your job, you are all about the optics, about managing relationships, what it looks like externally. How do you think Andy Burnham is managing, then, these very first few days of wrestling with who should and who shouldn't be in his cabinet?
Well, not very well. He's left a big vacuum, and, the press love a vacuum, and by letting it stand that Ed Miliband may become Chancellor, there's been endless speculation. And when the US president, even as an eccentric and offensive one as Donald Trump, is actually commenting on your potential Chancellor when you're not even installed as leader yet, that's not very helpful. More worrying is where it leaves the market in limbo. And the one thing he has signalled is that the current Chancellor, for all her faults, the markets are settled with her, they know where she is. She's obviously going. So it's the worst of all worlds there. But I just think it's the case with these things. You don't put the cart in front of the horse. What he needs to articulate is what went wrong before and how he will do things differently and what the priorities are and what we need to get there. And if you spell that out, then the press can fill in and the public can draw their own conclusions about what face fits that brief, that profile, that sort of priority. But to focus on the personalities first and what that would mean for policies afterwards is the wrong way around.
Yeah, he did actually say, didn't he, in that LBC interview, that all those people who are jostling for a job, Kitty, he said, you should find out the direction that I'm going in first and then work out what you can contribute to it. I wonder how clear you feel we are on Andy Burnham's policies, because so far we've had that sort of, he set out his stall, didn't he? He's done that one interview, and then we learnt yesterday via Reddit a question there that he's going to keep the pension triple lock. Could we write sort of a well-defined Andy Burnham policy agenda?
No, I've tried quite a lot, actually, and it's really quite hard because we know a lot about devolution. We know a lot about what he thinks about handing powers to regional mayors, about what he thinks about utility companies. We even know that he wants to put tax up on big warehouses like Amazon out-of-town warehouses in order to pay to subsidise pubs, to keep pubs open. But you're absolutely right on the sort of big ticket items. I think one of the guiding principles is now emerging is he's going to stick by the 2024 Labour manifesto in as much as he can, which is why he keeps defending the triple lock. On the kind of Ask Me Anything Reddit thread yesterday, he was asked multiple times about the triple lock. Lots of younger people saying, look, there's intergenerational unfairness here. Millionaire pensioners, why should they keep it? And he's saying, well, no, we've got to stick to what we said in our manifesto, and that is a commitment to keeping the triple lock the whole of his parliament. And also, he said that he's not going to go to the country and have an election because he's abiding by, he's sticking to what was in the manifesto, and therefore he thinks he's got a mandate, or he has inherited a mandate from Keir Starmer. But you're absolutely right. Like, we don't know, and I think it's a little bit. He's got this sort of attitude that he's anti-establishment, and he's come back in, and he's sort of going to do things differently, and one of the things is he wants to sort of tone down the whipping system so MPs aren't, bound by party lines so much. But it doesn't really fit with how Westminster works, and MPs are basically, they're interested in what he can offer, but also it's hard to know what you can offer the new Prime Minister if you don't know what he stands for.
Okay, so can I ask you about this Ask Me Anything approach on Reddit? He's not the first politician to somewhat dodge scrutiny, and I can only say that because he's done a radio interview this week, albeit a slightly truncated one compared to the one that was advertised. Politicians in the past, let me think of, hidden in fridges to avoid interviews and scrutiny.
Calum.
And I'm just wondering what you make of the approach to sort of take it onto Reddit, do this Ask Me Anything with, with people on the internet. Is that valid?
No, it's like a great mathematician walking into a room full of people like me and saying, you can ask me anything about sort of advanced mathematics. It's not really a challenge, is it? It's because I wouldn't know where to start. I have a very straightforward view on this, that, a politician who dodges the press is like a rugby player who doesn't put in the tackles. Mm-hmm. It is a big part of the job. It's not the glory bit, it's not the scoring the tries, but it's a big, big part of the job. And one of the things that I was appalled by, since you mentioned the fridge incident, it was not on my watch when Boris Johnson was hiding in the fridge. And one of the first things I did when I came into Number 10, despite it being a pretty ghastly, state of affairs that I was inheriting, was just remind Boris of that rugby thing, that he needs to be out there. And I think most of the media would acknowledge that he started doing an awful lot of press again, because even if people don't like your answers, they're entitled to know what your answers are. They're entitled to know how you think. They're entitled to know what you believe the country should be, or in which direction the country should be heading. So for Andy Burnham to be dodging this so early, when he's already got the advantage, going to be crowned, God, I would use this moment, spell out what you want to do, because he's kind of got the leadership in the bag. So if he's not using it to create a sort of mandate for himself, he's wasting the first massive opportunity of his premiership.
Yeah,
he's sort of trying to do that, Kitty, on social media.
Yeah, and I do agree with Guto. I don't think this is sustainable. I think he needs to. I mean, the one thing is, do we think he knows what he thinks about everything?
Yeah.
And I have sort of some sympathy until you get into office and you go through the papers and you have the briefings and you have access to all the information. Perhaps you can't start making detailed policy decisions, but if he's been thinking about this since conference time last year, so September.
At least.
At least. Yes, you're right. And so I did expect him to have a more developed policy platform, and perhaps they're holding it back. Perhaps we're going to see a raft of announcements over the summer. But I do think he just needs to sort of stand up and take some questions. I really do.
Yeah. I remember the late Alex Salmond instructed his chief of staff, Jeff Aberdeen, who's a friend of mine who I do a podcast with. He said, anytime you want me in front of a microphone, tell me and I'll do it. And and that was his approach, and he was not shy, was Alex Salmond, and he was somebody who had, I think, would say what you like about him, and there's a lot of questions that can be asked and a lot of criticism that can be levelled at him, but he had a vision and he delivered it, in terms of how he conveyed it, I mean, in messaging. So I think that's one thing to consider. Right, well, let's go on. In fact, we'll hold off for a second. We'll chat about Sir Keir Starmer's approach in this interview, this sort of quite personal interview about how he came to the conclusion that it was time to go. We'll also talk about this incident at the pub in London where a man was lifted out by police to have a word. They say because they worried about the potential for a crime to be committed. Of course, it's sparked lots of people online to question why the police are doing that instead of arresting people for actually committing crimes. Stay with us. We've got Guto and Kissy staying with us too. So Keir Starmer's sat down for an interview since announcing his, for the first time really, since announcing his resignation. He's been speaking about how personal it was, the tension that there has been. He's also given advice to Andy Burnham that actually he is going to have to concentrate on foreign policy and give it, I think it's fair to say, get a sort of equal footing at least to domestic policy making. He says it's not sensible to think you can just separate these two things out. He said he was asked if prime ministers could spend less time on diplomacy. He said, no, I don't think it's possible. Is it tricky to find the balance between foreign policy and domestic policy? And Andy Burnham's kind of hinted, I suppose, Guto, that he may sort of devolve that to his foreign secretary and team. Is that possible in your experience?
I think it is. It's very tempting when you are Prime Minister to look at foreign policy as the sexier side of the job, if you like. You're on the world stage, you're deciding on war and peace, all that stuff, and getting potholes fixed or roads, or the financing of major projects can seem quite pedestrian. But it is, in the end, what matters most. Now, one bleeds into the other, but I think we saw in Rishi Sunak's decision to bring back David Cameron as Foreign Secretary that if you do have a Foreign Secretary of genuine stature who can walk into a room and nobody there doubts that he or she can make the judgment call and they're not going to sneak out on the phone to the Prime Minister because all they are is a bag carrier. If you do appoint a Foreign Secretary of stature, then I think you can delegate it to a large extent, and I think he should.
Yeah, and Kitty, part of the thinking there, and the Cameron example is helpful in this, is that if you take somebody like Cameron, or say for argument's sake David Miliband, somebody who is in the House of Lords, they have less of a constituency tie, and therefore the kind of foreign gallivanting that is required in that sort of job actually becomes a little bit easier from that point of view. Is it a valid approach for a PM to sort of delegate more fully, do you think? And would that be a sensible approach for Burnham?
I do think it works quite well from the House of Lords, actually, because you don't have to be back for votes. And I remember talking to a foreign secretary who said that when they went abroad, their counterparts were absolutely baffled that they'd have to leave meetings early and come back to London in order to be, there for a vote on potholes or whatever it was. Not potholes, something minor anyway. But I think there's been. The interesting point is, so we revealed that David Miliband was in line for this a couple of weeks ago, and since when there's been a kind of backlash in the Parliamentary Labour Party, partly because of what we were talking about before, which is, is there nobody in this kind of group of 400 MPs who can be Foreign Secretary? Why do you need to bring back someone who was like big in the late 90s? There's that kind of attitude going on. Are you really going to have the two Miliband brothers back in cabinet and have all the kind of psychodrama that goes back with that? And then when we published yesterday this kind of speculation about Ed Balls, I don't think Ed Balls is going to go to the House of Lords because there's not much you can do from a sort of money perspective in the House of Lords, actually. There's only one Labour minister and Treasury minister in the Lords at the moment, Spencer Livermore, and he sort of focuses on growth. And I think Andy Burnham's team want to focus on growth from number 10. So I suspect if Ed Balls is brought back or asked to do something for them, he will be based in number 10, either in London or Manchester, and working on some sort of growth commission or growth plan in order to drive that from there. But speculation, it feeds papers, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, you and me both, Kitty. That is for sure.
Shall we move on to something different just for a moment or two? Earlier on the programme, we spoke to Alistair Hilton. If you didn't hear it, he's currently at the centre of a row over free speech, and he claims police overreach. He was spoken to by police officers outside a pub about his social media content. Alistair had been posting criticism of a local councillor about pubs restricting riverside drinking. He said the councillor lived near the row of pubs in question, And this seems to be the core of it, because he was warned about trying to generate a protest outside a politician's home. Alistair, the councillor and the Met Police all deny wrongdoing. So where do we draw the line between protecting politicians and criticising them? Guto, do you think a line was crossed here?
Yes, I do. And I'm pretty clear on this. You know, the police should be 95% at least focus on bad acts, not on offensive words. And if a line was crossed, literally, if there was a protest outside a house and somebody was in genuine mortal or physical danger, then that line is crossed. I don't think that was remotely crossed. And even if this particular protest was approaching a situation where a councillor felt genuinely intimidated, there is no need for two cops in uniform to walk into a packed pub and humiliate a man when he's with his mates having a pint. The police can do this thing in a more civilised, more grown-up, more mature way. I feel for the police. They are asked to do all kinds of things at the moment, but if we get back to focusing on bad acts, not on the motivation behind them, and certainly not on offensive words, we would be in a better place. And just a word on free speech. You know, it should not have to be said that we value and have fought for, and people have died for free speech in Britain for decades, indeed for centuries, because there are benefits to it, and we erode it at our peril. And there is an erosion going on at the moment. It's not as hysterical as the right sometimes claim, but it is one to watch, and we need to draw a line in the sand again and not cross that line where we undermine free speech unnecessarily.
So for you, Guto, the problem was not that the police decided to speak to Adrian, it's the manner in which the way they did it. They didn't have to do it so publicly. Well,
both. They didn't need to do it publicly, and I don't think, based on what I know, that they needed to talk to him at all. There's this concept of, a non-criminal misdemeanor. Good Lord, if the police were bored because they'd solved every serious crime in their patch, absolutely go and do a little preemptive work talking to people whose words on Twitter may imply that down the line they may just about perhaps maybe tomorrow or the day after become a real genuine menace. But we're not in that position. There's a whole load of nasty crimes where the police don't even get involved. If you miss your bike or your car is stolen or you were attacked even, not to mention a whole string of things with drug dealers openly trading on streets. If they're in a position where they've cleaned all that up, then they can actually send a text asking somebody to come in and have a chat about, a Green councillor feeling upset.
Kitty, we have had situations, haven't we, where politicians have been put in real danger. Do you think the balance was wrong here as well?
Oh, I absolutely agree with everything that Guto said. It is absolutely astonishing. And I think what's incredibly frustrating is that the policeman in the interview or in the clip that was played is incredibly sheepish. He doesn't seem to be kind of his heart's not really in it. He's sort of kind of weirdly quoting the law at this guy on the kind of riverside outside a pub in Chiswick, and you just think, come on guys, have you not got anything better to do than drag someone out of a pub in order to read a bit of paper out to them? And every time I think that the police are getting their act together and getting themselves, less out of tune with the public, they go and do something like this. And it just, I really think someone in leadership in the police needs to take a good hard look at, how they come across, because they just lose the trust of the public every time they open their mouths at the moment. Yeah,
and we got a statement from the Met Police. They said, "We believe our officers acted fairly and proportionally, were professional, polite and courteous throughout the interaction." They go on to say police officers will sometimes speak to members of the public, often to de-escalate and resolve situations.
Right, just a quick one for you both then. Prime Ministers and their favourite music, because in his online Ask Me Most Things yesterday, Andy Burnham says that he loves the band Doves. Of course, for Gordon Brown, it was this lot. Why are we so concerned with what bands politicians like? And do they ever give authentic answers, Guto, or is this something that's written down and rehearsed, ready for when the question comes up?
Sadly, depends on the politician. If it is the latter, then it's utterly useless because a team of people will have worked out the answers for them. If they blurt out what they genuinely think, I think Boris once picked sexual healing, which, you can imagine someone like me, when those words come out of his mouth, you should go, no!
Oh, dear.
But lean into what people think of you. In the end, the serious bit about this is we do not choose people for their policy choices in the end. We choose people for their character, because character informs judgment. And judgment is the thing that kicks in situations that nobody can actually predict when they are drawing up a sort of list of promises for a manifesto, whether they're facing a general election or a coronation like Andy Burnham now. Yeah. And these are little insights that can be very, very telling about how empathetic people are, how romantic, how unromantic, how autistic, whatever it is about their character that maybe we want, we need, we like, or we dislike. It is valid, but there should be some way of testing them so that they don't get to ask a team of advisors to manufacture a sort of contrived set of answers on this, because that just annoys all of us.
Yeah. Casey, journalists like you and I, we quite like having a sort of quick fire round with politicians. And actually, I'm thinking of Jack Mate's podcast, where I don't know if he still does this, but back in the day, he used to ask all of his guests what their choice of meal deal would be from Tesco. What sandwich and wrap and snack and drink they'd get. Do you have a favourite sort of quick fire question you tend to deploy?
Yeah, I love those things. There's a good one in the Times weekend section when they ask people like what they, do they get up early or not? And I always think they're pretty telling, actually, because Guto's absolutely right. They tell you something about which way someone would jump if pushed. And the meal deal one's a nice one. What do I ask? Oh, I've got a friend once who kind of ran out of questions in an interview and ended up asking someone what their favourite colour was, which I would not recommend, but it still makes me laugh when I think about it.
No, that's good. And I think it's about the authenticity, isn't it? Can you tell, Kissy, if you ask a question like that, whether a politician's kind of giving you a real answer or whether they've got one that they think might be... I mean, we all think of Theresa May's field of wheat, don't we? That's the thing.
Well, I think that was authentic, though, because daughter of a vicar, I think, and living in the countryside, I think probably running through a wheat field and upsetting a farmer probably was one of the naughty things he could do. So it just seems so sort of old-fashioned, though. I think that that's why everyone took the mickey. But for her, knowing her, I do think that was authentically her, actually. I'm not sure I ever believed the Arctic Monkeys from Gordon Brown. Yeah. I always thought he was more of a sort of classical music. I think when Keir Starmer went on Desert Island Discs and picked Ode to Joy, Beethoven's Ode to Joy, everyone was a bit like, what are you doing? That's the EU theme song. Is that the line, Keir? I don't know if it is. And then that's kind of haunted him, because when he left Downing Street the other day, Steve Bray, the protester, was playing it for blast from Downing Street's gates, which was annoying.
Very annoying, yes, to say the least. Good stuff. Thank you both very much. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure to have both of you. Guto Harri, the former Downing Street Director of Communications under Boris Johnson, and Kitty Donaldson, Chief Political Commentator at the I Paper.